You clicked on a missing child's face. But here's what you didn't expect. Some of these children were found alive. Some had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. And one of them had absolutely no idea they were even on a missing poster at all. This is Stories of the Missing, and tonight, we're bringing them home. Before we go any further, if you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell right now. Every single case on this channel is real, every name belongs to a real person, and every story deserves to be heard by as many people as possible. You being here helps make that happen. Now, let's start with the girl who was declared dead while she was sitting 5 minutes from her childhood bedroom. Natasha Ryan grew up in Rockhampton, Australia. By the time she was 14, her home life had already fractured in ways that left marks. Her parents had separated when she was young, and the instability that followed shaped everything about how she moved through the world. She fought constantly with her mother. She was suspended from school more than once. And she had developed a habit, almost a reflex, of running away whenever the pressure at home became too much. The pattern was consistent enough that people around her stopped treating it as a crisis. She always came back. So when she disappeared on the 31st of August, 1998, the initial response was measured. The police knew her history. Her family assumed she would surface in a few days. The assumption felt reasonable. It wasn't. Weeks passed. Then months. The silence stretched past anything her pattern suggested. And somewhere in that stretch of time, the investigation quietly changed shape. Around the same time Natasha vanished, other young women in Rockhampton were also disappearing. The cases began to look connected. Something coordinated and predatory, investigators believed, was moving through that community. Then, in April of 1999, another girl was taken. This time, there was a witness. The man identified was Leonard Fraser, a convicted predator with a criminal history that stretched back years and included offenses of the most serious kind. Police moved quickly. But they were already too late for his most recent victim. Fraser was arrested and charged. Investigators believed he was responsible for the earlier disappearances as well, including Natasha's. But belief alone wasn't enough. To charge him with those deaths, they needed a confession. Fraser said nothing. He sat in custody, waiting for trial, and refused to cooperate. Then the other inmates found out what he was in for. His safety inside deteriorated rapidly. He wanted out of general population and into protective custody, and that desperation handed police exactly the leverage they had been waiting for. The arrangement was direct. Confess, and you get moved somewhere safer. Fraser accepted. He confessed to ending the lives of 4 additional victims. One of the names on that list was Natasha Ryan. Police had every reason to believe him. The timeline aligned. The geography aligned. Natasha had been missing for nearly a year with no contact and no credible sightings. Fraser was charged with 5 murders. Natasha's family held a memorial service. Her name was spoken among the dead. Here is where the case becomes something else entirely. Natasha wasn't dead. She had been hiding the entire time. When she ran away that August, she went directly to the one person her family didn't know existed, a 22-year-old man named Scott, a boyfriend she had kept completely secret. She moved into his apartment and she didn't leave. The curtains stayed closed. When visitors came by, she concealed herself. When she needed to go outside, she waited until the middle of the night. As the years passed, she and Scott moved between several different addresses. At one point, they were living less than 5 minutes from Natasha's mother's house. She heard about Fraser's arrest. She heard his confession. She heard her own name attached to a murder charge. And she made a calculation, not a panicked, impulsive one, but a sustained, deliberate one, that coming forward would cause more damage than staying hidden. She decided the lie had grown too large. So she stayed in it. Here is the detail most retellings of this case overlook. Natasha's ability to disappear so completely wasn't the result of some elaborate criminal infrastructure. It was the result of one cooperative person and a disciplined routine. She didn't have false documents or a network of supporters. She had Scott, a closed curtain, and the willingness to live smaller than most people believe is possible. That is worth sitting with, because it tells you something uncomfortable about how thoroughly a person can vanish when the people around them choose not to ask questions. Fraser's trial began. Natasha stayed hidden. Then someone, identity never confirmed, mailed an anonymous letter to the police. The letter contained a phone number. Officers traced it to a house in a suburb called Frenchville. They knocked. Scott answered the door and told them Natasha wasn't there. They searched the apartment anyway. They walked into the bedroom. They opened the closet. And there she was, 23 years old, crouching in the dark, having spent nearly 5 years in hiding while a man was prosecuted for her murder. She was subpoenaed to testify. She told the court under oath that she had never met Leonard Fraser. That testimony created an immediate legal crisis. If Fraser fabricated the confession regarding Natasha, how reliable were the other confessions? The defense argued the entire case was built on unreliable admissions. In the end, independent forensic and circumstantial evidence was strong enough to sustain the convictions. Fraser received 3 indefinite sentences. The judge called him an untreatable psychopath. Natasha was fined for the cost of a false police investigation. Scott was convicted of providing false information to police and served 1 year in custody. Natasha never publicly apologized to her family. She and Scott eventually married. They raised 3 children together. What dismantled 9 years of calculated invisibility wasn't sophisticated police work or advanced forensics. It was a phone number. A single piece of personal information, passed from one anonymous person to law enforcement. One data point, and everything collapsed. Think about how much of your information is already out there right now. Your home address. Your family members' names. Your phone number. Your daily location patterns. Most people assume their data is too scattered to be useful. It isn't. Data broker websites, operating completely legally, completely without your consent, are compiling that information and selling it to anyone willing to pay. That isn't a theoretical risk. It happened to me. Someone located my personal details online and used them to threaten me and my family. After that, I spent weeks trying to remove my information manually and eventually gave up. The sites are too numerous and the removal process is deliberately difficult. These companies profit from your exposure and they are not motivated to make things easy. That is exactly the problem Aura was built to address. Aura identifies which data broker sites are holding your information and submits automated removal requests on your behalf. Within a few weeks, your name becomes significantly harder to find. Aura also monitors the dark web around the clock, alerts you the moment anyone attempts to open a financial account in your name, and backs everything with up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. A VPN, antivirus protection, and a password manager are included in the same subscription. Click the link in the description or go to aura.com/v to start a 14-day free trial. That window is enough time for Aura to show you exactly what's already circulating under your name, and to start pulling it back. In just a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about a boy who was taken at 7 years old, spent 7 years believing his own parents had given him away, and then used everything his kidnapper taught him to save another child. That story is coming. Stay with me. Stephen Stainer was 7 years old and walking home from school in Merced, California, when a stranger approached him. The man had a simple story. He was collecting donations for a church and wondered if Stephen's family might want to contribute. He offered to drive Stephen home so he could ask his mother. Stephen was 7. The offer sounded reasonable. He got in the car. He was never taken home. The man who took him was Kenneth Parnell. He drove the boy to a remote cabin and began, almost immediately, dismantling everything Stephen knew about himself. He told Stephen that he had just called his parents from a payphone, and that they didn't want him anymore. Stephen had no framework to challenge this. He was 7 years old and he was alone in a cabin with a stranger who was now, apparently, the only adult in his world. He believed the story because he had nothing else to hold on to. His name became Dennis. His hair was changed. Parnell enrolled him in school using forged documentation. Everyone in the community accepted Parnell as the boy's father. And because a child's survival instinct is extraordinarily powerful, Stephen adapted. He built a life inside the one he'd been handed. By the time 7 years had passed, that constructed life had become the only one he could clearly remember. Then Parnell fractured it. In 1980, Parnell abducted another child, a 5-year-old boy named Timothy White. He brought Timothy back to the house and presented him to Stephen as a new member of the family. Stephen was 14 by then. And when he looked at that 5-year-old boy, he saw something he had spent years suppressing in himself. He saw a child who had no idea what had just happened to him. A child who hadn't chosen any of this. A child who needed someone to act. That recognition changed everything. Stephen didn't have a plan. He didn't know where Timothy's family lived, and Timothy was too young to remember an address. But Stephen understood one thing with complete clarity: if they could reach a police station, the rest would follow. He waited for Parnell to leave for a night shift. The moment the door closed, Stephen took Timothy by the hand and they ran. They found the station. Stephen sat down and wrote a statement. He wrote, "I know my first name is Stephen. I'm pretty sure my last name is Stainer. And if I have a middle name, I don't know it." That same night, Parnell was arrested. Stephen was reunited with his family. Timothy was returned to his parents. The nation paid attention in a way it rarely does. Magazine covers, television appearances, the kind of saturating public attention that treats a traumatized teenager as a symbol before he's had a chance to simply be a person. Stephen struggled with the return. His family still processed him as the 7-year-old who had left. His peers at school treated celebrity as something to weaponize. He dropped out. At 20 he married, and the couple had 2 children together. In 1989, a television miniseries aired based on his story, titled "I Know My First Name is Stephen." It brought his case to an audience of millions. A few months after it aired, Stephen was killed in a motorcycle accident. He was 24 years old. At his funeral, one of the pallbearers was Timothy White, the 5-year-old boy Stephen had refused to leave behind. Timothy went on to become a sheriff's deputy. He built a career around protecting children, in direct and deliberate response to what Stephen had done for him. Timothy died at 35. The city of Merced honored them both with a statue, the 2 of them together as children. The age they were on the night one of them decided the other deserved a way out. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with the word "still here." I read every single one, and I want to know this story is landing. The next case wasn't cracked by a detective or a tip or a piece of forensic evidence. It was cracked by a college application form. Julian Hernandez was 5 years old in 2002 when his father took him. Bobby Hernandez had just lost a custody dispute. The court had awarded Julian's mother full legal custody, and Bobby had decided, quietly and without announcing it to anyone, that he was not going to accept that outcome. Julian's mother, trusting the arrangement that had been in place, left the boy with his father for an afternoon visit. Bobby left a note on the counter and disappeared with his son. He took Julian to Cleveland. He built new identities for both of them. When Julian, who was 5 and still held a clear memory of his mother, asked where she was, Bobby had the answer prepared. He told the boy she had abandoned them. That she had chosen to leave and didn't care what happened to them. 5-year-olds are not equipped to interrogate that narrative. Julian accepted it. He grieved something he didn't fully understand and then moved forward inside the life his father had constructed. By most visible measures, that life looked functional. Julian became an honor student and a competitive athlete. His relationship with his father was, from his perspective, genuinely close. Bobby had, in the most literal possible sense, raised him well. When Julian was 17 and began preparing college applications, he encountered a problem he couldn't solve. His social security number didn't match his name in the system. He went to his school counselor. The counselor ran a search. Julian's photograph came back as a match on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. He had been listed as an abducted child for 13 years. The FBI was contacted. Bobby Hernandez was in custody within days. Julian learned at 17 years old that the foundation of his entire life was a crime. His mother, who had spent 13 years not knowing whether her child was alive, received a phone call telling her that he was. At sentencing, Julian stood before the judge and asked for mercy on his father's behalf. He said Bobby had raised him with care. He said his academic record existed because of his father's investment in him. He asked the court to be lenient. The judge sentenced Bobby to 4 years in prison out of a possible 54. After the sentencing, Julian enrolled in college. He began rebuilding a relationship with his mother. He moved forward. The insight buried in this case, the one that gets missed in almost every retelling, is that Julian's discovery wasn't the result of investigative work. It was the result of a bureaucratic collision. A social security number that didn't correspond to the name attached to it. That single administrative mismatch did what 13 years of active searching couldn't. Sometimes the system exposes a long-running deception not because it's hunting for it, but because ordinary life eventually requires paperwork that false identities can't produce without friction. The next person on this list did not want to be found. She had also, by every available account, built a more self-sufficient life on the run than most people manage while staying put. Xiao Yun was 14 years old in 2005 when she asked her father for money and he refused. The refusal wasn't unusual. She and her parents had a long history of conflict. She ran away regularly. She fought with both of them and treated home as something provisional. When he said no that day, she left. And unlike every other time, she didn't come back. Her parents filed a missing persons report. Years passed with nothing. Eventually, the working assumption shifted. They believed she was dead. She was in internet cafes. Xiao Yun had figured out, while living on the streets, that she was unusually talented at a competitive online game called Crossfire. Talented enough that other players and cafe regulars would pay to watch her compete. That informal income became the economic engine of her disappearance. She slept in cafes and bathhouses. She paid for everything using a fake identification document. She avoided any situation that could surface her real name. She built a complete parallel life, small, unconventional, entirely self-managed, and she maintained it for 10 years. Not out of fear. Not because anyone was hunting her. Because she genuinely preferred it. In 2015, police conducted a routine document inspection at an internet cafe in her city. These checks are standard in China. When they reached Xiao Yun, her ID didn't hold up under scrutiny. They brought her in. A check against the National Missing Persons database returned a match. After sustained questioning, she confirmed who she was. Her mother was contacted. The reunion was complicated in ways a press release couldn't fully capture. Her mother acknowledged openly that she had been harsh and that her temper had driven a wedge. She said things would be different. Xiao Yun came home, though the available reporting suggests she did so without enthusiasm. She was fined for the false identification. After that, the public record on her effectively closes. What this case forces you to reckon with is something the missing persons framework doesn't have clean language for. Xiao Yun wasn't a victim of abduction. She wasn't trafficked or coerced or held against her will. She was a teenager who found the exit and took it, and then spent a decade demonstrating a level of resourcefulness and adaptability that most adults never develop. The system categorized her as missing. She categorized herself as free. Both of those things were true at the same time. Now the case that starts with a party in Milwaukee and ends somewhere most people never expected. Connie Mallister was 16 years old in 2004, living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was in a relationship with a 22-year-old man named Freddie Ruiz, a relationship that was inappropriate by any legal standard and one that the people around her had concerns about. One evening, the two of them attended a party together. At some point during the night, Connie found a moment to call her sister. Her voice was frightened. She said she wanted to leave the party, but Freddie wouldn't allow it. Then the call cut off. Connie didn't come home. A few days later, her family's phone rang. Both Connie and Freddie were on the line. They said they were fine. They refused to say where they were. That call gave her family almost nothing to work with and raised the kind of questions that don't have comfortable answers. Police developed a theory that the two had crossed the border into Mexico. But they had no location, no documentation, and no legal mechanism to compel either of them to surface. Here is what had actually happened at that party. Freddie had made a decision. He sedated Connie without her knowledge and drove her across the border while she was unconscious. She woke up in Mexico. No phone, no documentation, no Spanish, no money, and no way to reach anyone in the United States. Freddie had constructed in his mind a version of events where this was the beginning of something. That is not what it became. He became violent. The relationship deteriorated into something Connie had no safe exit from. At one point, she ended up hospitalized. Eventually, through means that were never fully detailed in public reporting, she found a way to leave him. But leaving Freddie didn't resolve the larger problem. She was still in a foreign country. She was still isolated by language. She had no documents and no established path back to the life she had been removed from. She survived. She became embedded, over time, in a life in Mexico that she had not chosen and could not easily escape. She connected with another man there. She built what stability she could. Connie was eventually located by American authorities, though the full details of how that contact was made remained limited in public reporting. What is documented is that she was alive. That she had endured years inside a situation that began with a 22-year-old man deciding a 16-year-old girl's life was his to rearrange. Freddie Ruiz was ultimately charged in connection with the abduction. The case became part of a broader conversation about cross-border abduction, the legal complexity of pursuing charges when a victim is located in another country, and the particular vulnerability of teenagers in relationships with adults who have the physical and financial capacity to remove them from everything familiar. Connie's story doesn't close with a clean resolution. There is no statue. There is no triumphant return press conference. There is a young woman who survived something that should never have happened to her, who rebuilt what she could from what remained. That is what survival often actually looks like, not a finish line, but a slow accumulation of days in which you are still here. The final case tonight involves a man who clicked on a missing children's website and found a photograph of himself. William Jerome Powell was born in 1966 in the United States. As an adult, working, married, living what appeared to be an ordinary life, he found himself on a website dedicated to missing children. He was browsing out of curiosity. And then he stopped. Because one of the faces on the screen was familiar in a way he couldn't immediately explain. The bone structure. The eyes. The shape of the face in the photograph of a missing child matched the face he saw in the mirror every morning. William had grown up with questions about his origins that never received satisfying answers. He had fragments of memory from early childhood that didn't align cleanly with the story he had been given about his past. He had always carried a low-level awareness that something about his history didn't fully add up. But awareness and action are different things, and for years he had let those fragments sit unexamined. The photograph changed that. He began investigating. He contacted the organization that maintained the missing persons database. He submitted to DNA testing. The results confirmed what the photograph had suggested. The missing child in the listing was him. He had been reported missing as a young boy. He had been, in the language of the law, abducted, though the circumstances were tangled in the way that family-based disappearances almost always are. The investigation that followed connected his disappearance to a family member who had removed him from his custodial situation when he was very young. Young enough that the memories he retained were impressionistic rather than specific. Young enough that, given a new environment and a new narrative about where he came from, he had adapted without ever fully knowing what had been taken from him. What makes William's case sit differently from the others in this video is the temporal distance of the discovery. He wasn't a teenager piecing together an inconsistency on a college form. He wasn't a young adult stumbling into information he wasn't prepared for. He was a grown man, married, established with a fully formed adult identity, who discovered through his own initiative that a foundational piece of his personal history had been constructed without his knowledge or consent. The family he was reconnected with had spent decades not knowing what happened to him. The reunion was real. The complexity of it was also real. Because by the time he found them, he was already someone. He had already built a life, formed relationships, developed a sense of who he was. The missing child in that photograph was both him and not him, a version of himself that had been interrupted before he was old enough to know it was happening. He has spoken publicly about the experience in limited ways. What he has said consistently, is that the discovery didn't destabilize him the way people expected it to. It clarified something. It filled in a silence he had learned to live around. And it gave him the ability, finally, to stop wondering. There is something in that worth holding on to. Because these cases, all 6 of them, are not primarily about the mechanics of disappearance. They are about the human capacity to survive interruption. To build a life in the space between what was taken and what remains. Natasha survived by going smaller than anyone thought possible. Stephen survived by refusing to leave someone else behind. Julian survived inside a fiction and then found a way to rebuild when the fiction collapsed. Xiao Yun survived by turning a skill into a livelihood and a livelihood into an entire parallel existence. Connie survived something that was done to her without her knowledge, in a country that wasn't hers, and came out the other side still standing. And William survived by simply living, and then one day, by looking closely at a face on a screen and choosing not to look away. Every single one of them is real. Every name in this video belongs to a person who actually existed in the world, who actually went through what you just heard, and who in most cases is still out there somewhere, living the rest of a story we only saw a portion of tonight. That matters. And the fact that you watched this far means it matters to you too. If you made it to the end of this one, do something for me. Share this video with one person, not as a recommendation, but as a reminder. A reminder that the faces on missing persons databases belong to real human beings with real families who are still waiting. Sometimes the best thing that comes out of a video like this is that one more person pays a little more attention. One more person looks twice. One more person remembers a name. Subscribe to Storysoft the Missing J if you haven't already. Every case on this channel is researched, every story is treated with the weight it deserves, and there are more coming. Come back for the next one. These people deserve to be remembered, and you showing up is how that happens.